Your emotions are not your enemy. But they are not your guide either. They are signals. Fast. Powerful. Automatic. And when they are misunderstood, they quietly run your life. Most people grow up believing that emotions are truths. If you feel something strongly, it must mean something important. If you feel angry, someone must be wrong. If you feel anxious, something must be dangerous. If you feel unmotivated, rest must be the answer. Emotions are treated as instructions rather than information. This belief feels natural, because emotions arrive with urgency. They do not knock politely. They surge. They demand attention. They create a sense of certainty that feels difficult to question in the moment. When an emotion is active, it feels like reality itself has shifted. But it hasn't. What has shifted is your nervous system. Emotions evolved long before logic, language, and long-term planning. They were designed for a world where survival depended on immediate action. Hear a noise in the dark, run. See a threat, fight or flee. Hesitate, and you die. In that environment, speed mattered more than accuracy. False alarms were acceptable. Overreaction was safer than underreaction. That ancient logic still runs inside you. Your body does not know that an email cannot kill you. Your nervous system does not know that social rejection is not physical danger. It responds to perceived threat the same way it always has, with urgency, tension, and the demand for immediate action. The problem is not that emotions exist. The problem is that modern life rewards restraint, clarity, patience, and long-term thinking, precisely the abilities emotions temporarily suppress. In other words, your emotions are optimized for survival, not for wisdom. When emotions are treated as commands, life becomes reactive. Decisions are made in moments of intensity and paid for over months or years. Words spoken in seconds damage relationships that took years to build. Opportunities are avoided not because they are wrong, but because they are uncomfortable. And slowly, without dramatic failure, people drift away from the lives they are capable of living. This is how emotional autopilot begins. Something happens. An emotion arises. Behavior follows. A sharp comment triggers defensiveness. Stress triggers withdrawal. Fear triggers procrastination. Frustration triggers aggression. None of these responses are consciously chosen. They feel automatic because they are. And because they feel automatic, they feel justified. In the moment, emotional reactions almost always feel reasonable. The story your mind tells you explains why the reaction makes sense. Why the other person is wrong. Why the situation is unfair. Why you deserve to feel the way you do. The emotion becomes evidence. But emotions do not tell the truth. They tell a story, one shaped by past experiences, assumptions, and biological shortcuts. When emotions lead, clarity follows later, if at all. The cost of this pattern is subtle at first. It does not arrive as catastrophe. It arrives as erosion. Confidence erodes when you repeatedly act in ways that do not align with your values. Self-trust weakens when you promise yourself you will handle things better next time, and then don't. Relationships strain when emotional reactions replace steady presence. Professional progress slows when composure is inconsistent. Most people do not fail dramatically. They plateau quietly. They become skilled, but not trusted. Capable, but not calm. Intelligent, but inconsistent. And inconsistency is far more damaging than lack of ability. Emotional mastery begins with a simple but profound shift in understanding. Emotions are signals, not commands. They are data, not directives. They tell you that something is happening internally. They do not tell you what to do about it. Anger does not mean attack. Fear does not mean retreat. Anxiety does not mean avoidance. Sadness does not mean collapse. These emotions point to something worth examining: a boundary, a value, a perceived risk, a loss, but they do not contain instructions for behavior. When you confuse signal with command, you surrender authorship of your life to your nervous system. When you separate the two, you regain choice. Choice is the foundation of emotional mastery. Not the absence of emotion. Not the suppression of feeling. Choice. The ability to feel fully without acting immediately. The ability to pause without disconnecting. The ability to let emotion inform you without letting it control you. This is far more difficult than it sounds, because emotion narrows attention. When an emotion is active, your mind zooms in. It focuses on threat, offense, loss, or urgency. Everything else fades. Long-term consequences feel distant. Alternative interpretations feel implausible. Patience feels unnatural. This narrowing is not a flaw. It is a feature, one that kept your ancestors alive. But in modern life, that same narrowing creates blind spots. Under emotional load, people overestimate threats, underestimate their own capacity, and misread others' intentions. They speak in absolutes. Always. Never. Everyone. No one. They react to imagined futures as if they are guaranteed outcomes. The more intense the emotion, the more convincing the story feels. And this is where most people make their critical mistake. They try to argue with the emotion. They try to reason it away. Suppress it. Shame themselves for feeling it. Or drown it out with distraction, substances, or noise. None of these approaches work for long, because emotions are not logical arguments. They are physiological states. You cannot outthink a nervous system that is already activated. You can only regulate it. Understanding this changes everything. Emotional mastery is not a battle against feeling. It is a skillful relationship with it. It starts with recognizing that every emotion has three components: a physical sensation, a thought pattern, and an urge to act. The physical sensation comes first. Tightness in the chest. Heat in the face. Clenched jaw. Shallow breathing. This is the body preparing for action. Then come the thoughts. Interpretations. Assumptions. Stories about what is happening and what it means. Finally, the urge. To speak. To withdraw. To attack. To escape. To fix something immediately. Most people live at the third level. They act on the urge without examining the sensation or the thought. Mastery begins by moving backward. By noticing the sensation before the action. By observing the thought without automatically believing it. By letting the urge exist without obeying it. This is the moment where choice re-enters the system. At first, this moment is brief. Almost invisible. A fraction of a second where you realize you are about to react. Most people miss it entirely. But with practice, that moment expands. And within that expanded moment, a different question becomes possible. Not what do I feel? But how do I choose to respond? This question changes the relationship between emotion and identity. Instead of saying, I am angry, you recognize, anger is present. Instead of I am anxious, you observe, anxiety is active. This linguistic shift is not cosmetic. It reflects a psychological separation between the observer and the experience. You are no longer fused with the emotion. You are aware of it. Awareness is the first form of control. From here, a deeper truth emerges. Most emotional reactions are not responses to the present moment. They are echoes of the past. They are shaped by earlier experiences, learned patterns, and stored expectations. A tone of voice triggers an old wound. A delay feels like rejection. A challenge feels like disrespect. The present moment becomes a stand-in for something unresolved. This does not mean emotions are wrong. It means they are layered. And when layered emotions are treated as commands, old patterns dictate current behavior. This is why people often react more strongly than a situation warrants. The intensity does not match the present facts because it is not coming from the present alone. Emotional mastery requires humility, the willingness to admit that what you feel may not fully reflect what is happening. This humility is not weakness. It is strength. It allows you to pause instead of defend, to ask instead of assume, to regulate instead of react. And over time, something remarkable happens. The emotions themselves change. When emotions are consistently acknowledged but not obeyed, the nervous system learns that immediate reaction is not required. The false urgency softens. Recovery becomes faster. Emotional intensity decreases. Calm becomes familiar. This is not because you are suppressing anything. It is because your system no longer needs to shout to be heard. Signals that are respected do not need to escalate. This is the paradox of emotional mastery. The more you stop letting emotions control you, the less control they attempt to exert. This is why highly composed people are not emotionless. They are regulated. They feel anger, but it does not leak into their voice. They feel fear, but it sharpens preparation rather than causing avoidance. They feel frustration, but it becomes fuel rather than volatility. They are not calmer because life is easier. They are calmer because they have trained themselves to respond rather than react. This training does not happen in theory. It happens in moments. Small moments. Mundane moments. A conversation that irritates you. A delay that frustrates you. A mistake that embarrasses you. These moments are not interruptions to growth. They are the training ground. Each time you pause instead of react, you strengthen regulation. Each time you choose your response, you reinforce agency. Each time you act in alignment with your values rather than your impulses, self-trust grows. And self-trust is the foundation of confidence. Not bravado. Not certainty. Confidence rooted in evidence, the evidence that you can handle yourself under pressure. This is what emotional mastery ultimately provides. Not control over others. Not immunity from difficulty. Control over your own behavior. The ability to stay grounded when things are uncertain. To remain steady when others escalate. To act deliberately when emotions are loud. This is not a personality trait. It is a practiced skill. And like any skill, it begins with understanding. Your emotions are signals. They deserve attention. But they do not deserve authority. When you stop treating them as commands, you reclaim authorship over your life. And that is where everything begins. Most people believe they are in control of their lives. They believe they choose how they act, what they say, and how they respond to situations. They believe their decisions are deliberate, rational, and intentional. But if you look closely, something else is happening. Much of human behavior is automatic. A stimulus appears. An internal reaction fires. A familiar response follows. And before conscious thought has time to intervene, the moment is already gone. This is emotional autopilot. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not feel reckless or out of control. In fact, it feels normal. Comfortable. Familiar. That is what makes it dangerous. Emotional autopilot is the state in which your past reactions quietly decide your present behavior. It is the default mode most people operate in for most of their lives. A tone of voice triggers irritation. A delay triggers anxiety. A challenge triggers defensiveness. A mistake triggers self-criticism. These reactions do not feel chosen. They feel inevitable. And because they feel inevitable, they go unquestioned. Emotional autopilot is built through repetition. Every time a reaction occurs and is followed by relief, justification, or avoidance, the brain learns that the reaction was useful. Neural pathways strengthen. The pattern becomes more efficient. Over time, the reaction fires faster and with less conscious involvement. Eventually, the gap between stimulus and response disappears. This is why people often say, "I don't know why I reacted that way," or "it just happened." They are telling the truth. By the time awareness arrived, the system had already executed the behavior. Autopilot thrives on familiarity. It prefers the known over the effective. It repeats what has worked before, even if it no longer serves you. If withdrawing once reduced discomfort, withdrawal becomes the pattern. If anger once created control, anger becomes the tool. If people-pleasing once prevented conflict, self-abandonment becomes the habit. These patterns form early, often long before you had language for them. And once formed, they feel like personality. I'm just short-tempered. I overthink everything. I shut down under pressure. I avoid conflict. These are not identities. They are conditioned responses. But when autopilot runs long enough, behavior hardens into self-concept. People begin to defend their reactions as who they are. This is where growth stops. Because you cannot change what you believe defines you. Emotional autopilot is reinforced by speed. Modern life moves fast. Notifications, deadlines, conversations, decisions. There is little space between moments. Little silence. Little pause. And speed favors automation. The faster life moves, the more the brain relies on shortcuts. It reaches for familiar responses because they require less energy, less thought, less uncertainty. Pausing feels inefficient. Slowing down feels risky. Reflection feels indulgent. So autopilot tightens its grip. And slowly, reactivity becomes normal. One of the clearest signs of emotional autopilot is justification. When a reaction happens and the mind immediately explains why it was necessary. They deserved it. I had no choice. That's just how I am. Anyone would react that way. Justification protects autopilot from examination. If the reaction is always justified, it never has to change. Another sign is regret. Not dramatic regret. Quiet regret. The kind that appears later, when the nervous system has settled and perspective returns. The moment when you replay the conversation and realize you spoke too sharply. Or withdrew too quickly. Or avoided something important. You tell yourself you'll handle it differently next time. But next time comes fast. And autopilot fires again. This cycle erodes self-trust. Each unkept promise to yourself weakens confidence. Each repeated reaction reinforces the belief that change is difficult, maybe impossible. This is how people become resigned to patterns they secretly dislike. They stop trying to respond differently because effort feels futile. But the truth is this: autopilot is not permanent. It is learned. And anything learned can be unlearned. The first step is recognizing how autopilot operates. Autopilot does not respond to reality. It responds to perception. And perception is shaped by filters. Your brain is constantly filtering information based on past experiences, beliefs, expectations, and emotional memory. These filters determine what you notice, what you ignore, and how you interpret events. Two people can experience the same situation and have completely different emotional reactions. One hears feedback and feels attacked. Another hears the same feedback and feels curious. The difference is not the event. It is the filter. Emotional autopilot is powered by unconscious interpretations. You are not reacting to what is happening. You are reacting to what you think it means. And most of these meanings are assigned instantly, without conscious review. She disrespected me. This is going to fail. They don't care. I'm about to look stupid. These interpretations feel like facts in the moment. But they are not facts. They are hypotheses. Autopilot treats hypotheses as certainty. This is why emotional reactions feel so compelling. The mind believes the story it tells itself. And belief drives behavior. Breaking autopilot does not mean eliminating emotion. It means interrupting the certainty. It means learning to say, even briefly, this is one interpretation, not the only one. That single sentence creates space. Space weakens autopilot. Another fuel for autopilot is identity protection. Many emotional reactions exist to defend a self-image. Anger protects pride. Defensiveness protects competence. Avoidance protects comfort. People-pleasing protects belonging. When the self-image feels threatened, autopilot reacts automatically to restore balance. This is why feedback can feel unbearable. Why mistakes feel personal. Why disagreement feels like attack. Autopilot confuses challenge with danger. It treats discomfort as something to escape rather than something to tolerate. And tolerance is essential for growth. Growth requires exposure to uncertainty, friction, and effort. Autopilot avoids these things whenever possible. It steers you toward the familiar, even when the familiar is limiting. This is how people stay stuck. Not because they lack ambition, but because their nervous system is optimized for comfort, not expansion. Emotional autopilot is efficient. And efficiency is not always your ally. To interrupt autopilot, awareness must arrive earlier. Not after the reaction. During it. This requires learning to recognize early warning signs. Every emotional reaction has a build-up. A physical shift. A tightening. A change in breath. A surge of energy. These sensations appear before words are spoken, before actions are taken. Most people ignore them. They notice the reaction only after it has expressed itself. But with practice, these signals become recognizable. And recognition creates a window. This window may be brief at first. A second. Sometimes less. But within that second lies the opportunity to choose. Choice is not the absence of impulse. It is action in the presence of impulse. This distinction matters. Waiting to feel calm before acting is unrealistic. Calm comes after regulation, not before. The goal is not to eliminate emotion before responding. The goal is to respond despite emotion. Autopilot thrives when emotion feels like a reason. This feels urgent, so it must be. This feels threatening, so it is. Breaking autopilot means learning to tolerate the discomfort of not reacting immediately. This discomfort is the price of freedom. At first, it feels unnatural. The body wants release. The mind wants closure. The urge wants expression. But when you do not obey the urge, something surprising happens. The urge peaks. And then it passes. This is a critical lesson most people never learn. Emotions are temporary. Urges are temporary. They feel permanent only when you have never stayed still long enough to watch them fade. Autopilot convinces you that action is required for relief. In reality, regulation creates relief. And regulation requires patience. This patience is not passive. It is active restraint. It is strength. Each time you resist autopilot, you weaken its authority. Each time you pause, you strengthen awareness. Each time you choose deliberately, you reinforce agency. Over time, the brain adapts. The nervous system learns that immediate reaction is not necessary. The threshold for activation rises. Recovery becomes faster. And what once felt automatic becomes optional. This is how people change. Not through force. Not through self-criticism. Through repetition. Small, consistent interruptions of autopilot. One conversation handled with restraint. One urge observed without action. One pause inserted where reaction used to live. These moments compound. And slowly, something shifts. You begin to feel less hijacked by your emotions. Not because you feel less but because you are no longer compelled to act immediately. This is the beginning of emotional freedom. Not freedom from emotion, Freedom from automatic behavior. Autopilot loses its grip not when emotions disappear, but when awareness arrives sooner. And awareness is a skill. It can be trained. In the next chapter, we will explore how emotional mastery is not a single switch, but a progression levels of awareness and control that develop over time. You do not jump from autopilot to mastery overnight. You move through stages. Understanding these stages gives you a map. And with a map, progress becomes possible. There is a moment small, quiet, and easily missed where everything changes. It exists between what happens and what you do next. Most people never notice it. They move straight from stimulus to reaction, from feeling to behavior, from impulse to action. The moment is skipped, collapsed, overridden by urgency. But that moment is where choice lives. And choice is the foundation of emotional mastery. Restoring choice does not mean eliminating emotion. It does not mean waiting until you feel calm, confident, or certain. It means acting deliberately while emotion is present. This is the skill most people never develop. They assume control comes from feeling differently. From being calmer, less anxious, less reactive, more confident. But control does not come from changing how you feel. It comes from changing how you respond. Emotion is fast. Choice is slower. And because modern life rewards speed, most people never slow down enough to access choice. They let urgency decide for them. Restoring choice begins with a shift in responsibility. Not responsibility for how you feel, but responsibility for what you do. You are not responsible for the emotion that arises. That happens automatically, shaped by biology, conditioning, and context. But you are responsible for the behavior that follows. This distinction is uncomfortable, because it removes excuses. You can no longer say, I snapped because I was angry, or I avoided it because I was anxious, or I shut down because I was overwhelmed. Those statements explain behavior, but they do not justify it. Restoring choice means accepting a difficult truth: emotion influences behavior, but it does not control it unless you allow it to. At first, this truth feels unfair. Emotions can be intense, overwhelming, consuming. How can you be expected to choose clearly when everything inside you is demanding action? The answer is not willpower. It is regulation. Choice becomes available when the nervous system is regulated enough to allow it. This is why emotional mastery is not a moral achievement. It is a physiological one. When your nervous system is highly activated, choice narrows. Options disappear. Perspective collapses. The brain defaults to familiar patterns. You do not need to eliminate activation to regain choice. You need to reduce it just enough. This is where most people go wrong. They wait until they feel calm to respond. That moment rarely comes. The correct approach is to lower activation slightly, not eliminate it entirely. Even a small reduction creates space. That space is enough. The first step in restoring choice is noticing activation early. Not after you've raised your voice. Not after you've sent the message. Not after you've walked away. Earlier. At the level of the body. Before emotion becomes language, it becomes sensation. A tightening in the chest. A heat in the face. A clench in the jaw. A quickening of breath. These sensations are the earliest indicators that the system is activating. Most people ignore them. They are too busy listening to the story in their head. But the story comes second. The body comes first. Restoring choice requires learning to listen to the body before listening to the narrative. This is not intuition in the romantic sense. It is awareness. When you notice the physical signs of activation, you are no longer fully inside the reaction. You are observing it. And observation changes the relationship. Instead of being the emotion, you are noticing it. This shift may seem subtle, but it is profound. It is the difference between drowning and standing on the shore watching the water move. From this position, regulation becomes possible. Not through suppression. Through engagement. The simplest and most reliable regulatory tool is breathing. Not deep breathing. Not dramatic breathing. Slow breathing. Specifically, extending the exhale. The nervous system has two primary modes, activation and recovery. Activation prepares you for action. Recovery restores balance. Longer exhales activate the recovery system. This is not theory. It is physiology. A few slow breaths with a longer exhale can reduce heart rate, lower muscle tension, and widen attention. You are not trying to relax. You are trying to regain access to choice. As the body settles slightly, the mind follows. Not all the way. Just enough. This is the window. In this window, a new question becomes possible. Not how do I feel? But what matters most right now? This question shifts attention from impulse to intention. Impulse asks for immediate relief. Intention asks for long-term alignment. Impulse is concerned with discharge. Intention is concerned with direction. Restoring choice means prioritizing direction over discharge. This is difficult, because discharge feels urgent. But urgency is not importance. Emotion creates urgency. Values create importance. When you act from urgency, you optimize for relief. When you act from importance, you optimize for outcomes. This is the difference between reacting and responding. Responding does not mean being passive. It means being deliberate. It means allowing emotion to inform you without allowing it to rush you. Another essential component of restoring choice is language. The way you describe your internal experience shapes how much control you feel over it. When you say, "I am angry," you fuse identity with emotion. When you say, "Anger is present," you create separation. This separation restores agency. You are no longer the emotion. You are the one experiencing it. This may sound like semantics. It is not. Language organizes perception. And perception determines behavior. People who feel consumed by emotion speak in absolutes. I can't handle this. I have no choice. This always happens. These statements collapse possibility. They reinforce helplessness. Restoring choice requires precise language. This feels intense. I'm having the urge to react. This is uncomfortable, but temporary. These statements keep the door open. They remind the nervous system that this state will pass. And it will. Emotions peak and fall like waves. They only feel permanent when you are inside them. This is why time is such a powerful regulator. Pausing even briefly allows the wave to crest and recede. You do not need to resolve the situation in the peak of emotion. You need to survive the peak without making it worse. Most damage happens at the peak. Words spoken. Decisions made. Messages sent. Restoring choice often means doing nothing temporarily. Not avoidance. Delay. Delay is not denial. Delay is strategy. You delay action long enough for regulation to occur. Then you act. This delay may be seconds. Sometimes minutes. Occasionally longer. But the principle remains the same. Action taken from regulation is almost always better than action taken from reactivity. This is where people confuse strength with immediacy. They believe strength is responding quickly. In reality, strength is responding well. And responding well often requires waiting. Another obstacle to restoring choice is the fear of losing momentum. People worry that if they pause, they will lose their edge. Their assertiveness. Their power. The opposite is true. Unregulated emotion weakens power. It leaks into tone, posture, timing. Regulated emotion concentrates power. It sharpens presence. It makes words land. People who can pause under pressure appear confident, grounded, and authoritative, not because they are dominant, but because they are not rushed. Restoring choice also means accepting discomfort. There is no way around this. Choosing not to react immediately feels uncomfortable. The body wants resolution. The mind wants certainty. Choosing restraint feels like holding tension without release. This is why most people avoid it. But discomfort is not danger. It is sensation. And sensations can be tolerated. Each time you tolerate discomfort without reacting, your tolerance increases. The nervous system learns that discomfort does not require escape. This learning is transformative. It expands your capacity. Situations that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Triggers lose intensity. Recovery accelerates. Over time, restoring choice becomes easier. Not because life becomes calmer, but because you become steadier. This steadiness changes how others experience you. People trust those who are regulated. They feel safer around them. They listen more. They escalate less. Regulation is contagious. So is reactivity. When you restore choice, you influence the emotional tone of environments. Conversations slow down. Conflicts de-escalate. Clarity increases. This is especially important in relationships. Most relational damage does not come from differences. It comes from reactions. From defensiveness instead of curiosity. From withdrawal instead of communication. From attack instead of boundary setting. Restoring choice allows you to respond in ways that preserve connection without sacrificing integrity. It allows you to say difficult things without being destructive. It allows you to hear difficult things without collapsing or counterattacking. This is emotional maturity. Not the absence of emotion. The presence of choice. It is important to understand that restoring choice is not a one-time achievement. It is a practice. You will still react sometimes. Everyone does. The goal is not perfection. The goal is faster recovery. When you react, notice it sooner. Repair sooner. Reflect sooner. Each repair strengthens the system. Self-compassion matters here. Beating yourself up for reacting reinforces threat. Threat fuels autopilot. Curiosity weakens it. When a reaction happens, ask, what was I protecting? What did I interpret? What did my body need? These questions are not for judgment. They are for learning. Learning replaces shame. And learning accelerates growth. As you restore choice, something shifts internally. You stop fearing your emotions. You no longer see them as enemies to suppress or forces to obey. They become information. Signals. Messages from the system that can be interpreted wisely. This changes your relationship with yourself. You become less reactive internally. Self-criticism softens. Patience increases. You trust yourself more because you know you can pause. You know you can choose. And trust in yourself is the deepest form of confidence. Not confidence that you will always feel good. Confidence that you can handle yourself when you don't. This is what restoring choice ultimately gives you. Not control over life. Control over response. And that is enough. Because life will always be uncertain. People will disappoint you. Plans will change. Pressure will arrive. What determines the quality of your life is not whether these things happen. It is how you respond when they do. Choice is the lever. Restore it, and everything else becomes possible. In the next chapter, we will look more closely at the machinery behind emotional reactions, how the brain prioritizes speed over accuracy, and why understanding this system makes regulation far easier. Once you understand the mechanism, you stop blaming yourself. And when blame disappears, change accelerates. To master your emotions, you have to stop taking them personally. This may sound strange at first. Emotions feel deeply personal. They arise inside you. They color your thoughts. They influence your behavior. How could they not be personal? But emotional reactions are not moral statements about who you are. They are mechanical responses generated by a biological system designed for speed, not accuracy. When you understand this system, something important happens. Shame loosens its grip. And without shame, learning becomes possible. At the center of emotional reactivity is a simple trade-off your brain makes every moment of every day. Speed versus precision. When the brain perceives potential threat, it prioritizes speed. It chooses to react quickly, even if it means being wrong. From an evolutionary perspective, this made perfect sense. A false alarm was survivable. A missed threat was not. The structure responsible for this rapid assessment is the amygdala. The amygdala is not intelligent in the way people imagine intelligence. It does not analyze context. It does not weigh long-term consequences. It does not care about nuance. Its only job is to ask one question: is this dangerous? And it asks that question constantly. The amygdala receives information faster than the thinking parts of the brain. It scans sensory input before conscious awareness has time to engage. When it detects something that resembles a past threat, it activates immediately. Not after reflection. Immediately. This activation triggers a cascade of physiological changes. Stress hormones are released. Heart rate increases. Muscles tense. Blood flow shifts toward large muscle groups. Attention narrows. Your body prepares for action. This process happens in fractions of a second. By the time you are aware that you are angry, anxious, or afraid, the system has already decided that action may be required. At the same time, something else happens. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, planning, impulse control, and perspective, loses influence. This is not because it shuts off completely. It is because resources are diverted. The brain reallocates energy toward survival functions. This is why, under emotional stress, people struggle to think clearly. It is why complex problem solving feels impossible when you are overwhelmed. It is why you later look back at situations and wonder, what was I thinking? You were thinking with a reduced system. This is sometimes called emotional hijacking. But that phrase can be misleading. It suggests something dramatic, like a takeover. In reality, this is the brain functioning exactly as it was designed to function. The issue is not malfunction. The issue is mismatch. The brain you have is optimized for a world you no longer live in. Your nervous system treats social threats like physical threats. A critical look. A sharp tone. A perceived slight. Uncertainty about the future. All of these can activate the same circuitry as physical danger. And once activated, the system pushes you toward familiar responses. Fight. Flee. Freeze. Appease. These are not metaphors. They are biological patterns. Fight looks like anger, argument, aggression, control. Flee looks like avoidance, withdrawal, procrastination. Freeze looks like indecision, shutdown, numbness. Appease looks like people-pleasing, self-silencing, over-accommodation. Everyone has preferred patterns. Not because of character. Because of conditioning. Your brain learned which response reduced discomfort fastest in the past. That response became the default. Over time, the brain stops evaluating alternatives. It simply executes. This is the reactive brain at work. It is fast. It is efficient. And it is often wrong. The reactive brain does not care if a reaction damages a relationship. It does not care if it undermines long-term goals. It does not care if it contradicts your values. It cares only about reducing immediate perceived threat. Understanding this removes a dangerous illusion. The illusion that emotional reactions reflect truth. When you feel strongly about something, the feeling does not confirm accuracy. It confirms activation. Strong emotion does not mean you are right. It means your nervous system is aroused. This distinction is essential. Without it, people justify harmful behavior by pointing to intensity. I wouldn't feel this way if it weren't true. But intensity is not evidence. It is output. Another important feature of the reactive brain is pattern matching. The amygdala does not analyze situations in detail. It looks for resemblance. It compares current input to stored emotional memories. If something feels similar to a past threat, the alarm activates even if the present situation is objectively different. This is why old wounds get reopened by new situations. A supervisor's feedback feels like parental criticism. A partner's silence feels like abandonment. A small mistake feels like catastrophic failure. The brain is not responding to now. It is responding to then. And because this happens below conscious awareness, the reaction feels appropriate to the present moment. This is why people often say, "I know it doesn't make sense, but I can't help how I feel." They are right. The feeling makes sense to the nervous system. It does not necessarily make sense to reality. The reactive brain also distorts time. Under stress, the present moment feels urgent and absolute. The future shrinks. Long-term consequences lose emotional weight. This is why people make decisions under pressure that they later regret. In the moment, relief feels more important than outcome. Escape feels more important than alignment. The reactive brain cannot hold complexity. It simplifies. Good versus bad. Safe versus dangerous. Right versus wrong. Nuance disappears. This is why emotional conversations escalate. Each person's reactive brain interprets the other as a threat. Each response intensifies the other's activation. And the cycle feeds itself. Breaking this cycle requires engaging a different system. Not by force. By timing. You cannot reason with the reactive brain while it is dominant. Trying to argue with yourself in the peak of emotion usually fails. You cannot logic your way out of a physiological state. You have to change the state first. This is why regulation precedes insight. Once activation lowers, the prefrontal cortex regains influence. Perspective returns. Options reappear. You remember what matters. This is why you often find clarity after a walk, a shower, or a night's sleep. Not because the problem changed. Because your nervous system did. Understanding this removes self-blame. When you realize that emotional reactions are state-dependent, not identity-based, you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What state am I in?" This question is far more useful. States can be changed. Identities feel fixed. The reactive brain is not something to eliminate. It is something to manage. It will always activate. The goal is not to prevent activation. The goal is to reduce its authority. You want the reactive system to alert you, not command you. Alert without takeover. This is achieved through repetition. Each time you notice activation and regulate before acting, you weaken the dominance of the reactive brain. Each time you pause, breathe, and choose, you strengthen the regulatory circuits. The brain is plastic. It changes based on use. Circuits that are used frequently become stronger. Circuits that are interrupted weaken. This is how emotional mastery is built. Not through understanding alone. Through practice. Small moments of regulation repeated consistently. The reactive brain learns through experience, not explanation. You cannot convince it that you are safe. You have to show it. By staying present. By not panicking. By not reacting impulsively. By tolerating discomfort without escape. Each time you do this, the alarm system recalibrates. The threshold for activation rises. Triggers lose intensity. Recovery becomes faster. This is why people who practice regulation do not become numb. They become resilient. They still feel emotion, but it does not hijack them. It informs them. Another important aspect of the reactive brain is that it is contagious. Emotional states spread between people. Tone of voice, posture, facial expression, pacing, these cues are processed unconsciously. When someone is reactive, it activates others. When someone is regulated, it stabilizes others. This is why calm leadership matters. Not because calm people are smarter, but because they reduce activation in the room. They create conditions where thinking becomes possible. This applies in families, workplaces, friendships, and public spaces. One regulated nervous system can influence many dysregulated ones. This is power. Not the power of dominance. The power of steadiness. It is also why your own regulation matters even when others are reactive. You cannot control their nervous systems, but you can refuse to amplify them. This refusal changes dynamics. It slows escalation. It creates space. It protects your integrity. The reactive brain will always argue for immediacy. It will tell you that you must respond now. That silence is weakness. That delay is avoidance. That restraint is loss of control. These messages are false. They are survival signals misapplied. Responding later, from regulation, is not avoidance. It is strategy. Silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It is discipline. Restraint is not loss of control. It is control. Understanding the reactive brain allows you to stop fighting yourself. Instead of trying to eliminate emotional responses, you learn to work with them. You respect the signal. You regulate the state. You choose the response. This sequence becomes automatic over time. Not because you force it, because you practice it. And practice rewires the brain. The reactive system quiets. The regulatory system strengthens. Calm becomes familiar. Not because life is easy, but because your nervous system has learned that you can handle difficulty without panic. This is the foundation of emotional mastery. Not suppression. Not denial. Integration. In the next chapter, we will look at what happens when reactivity goes unchecked for years, how repeated reactions harden into identity, and how people begin to confuse emotional patterns with who they are. Understanding this is critical. Because you cannot change what you believe you are, but you can change what you do. And that difference is everything. There is a moment in every long-standing pattern where behavior stops feeling like something you do and starts feeling like something you are. This is where emotional reactivity becomes dangerous. Not because of the reactions themselves, but because of the story that forms around them. Over time, repeated emotional responses harden into identity. What begins as a habit becomes a label. What begins as a reaction becomes a personality trait. I'm just an angry person. I'm naturally anxious. I'm not good under pressure. I shut down when things get intense. I avoid conflict. These statements sound like self-knowledge. They are not. They are descriptions of learned patterns mistaken for permanent traits. The human mind craves coherence. It wants to make sense of behavior. When reactions repeat, the mind looks for a stable explanation. And the simplest explanation is identity. Instead of asking, why do I keep reacting this way? The mind concludes, this is just who I am. This conclusion is comforting in the short term. If it's who you are, you don't have to change it. But it is devastating in the long term. Because you cannot outgrow an identity you believe defines you. When reaction becomes identity, growth stalls. People stop experimenting with new responses because they feel inauthentic. They stop challenging patterns because it feels like self-betrayal. They defend their reactions not because they work but because they feel familiar. Familiarity masquerades as authenticity. This is one of the most subtle traps in emotional development. Authenticity is often misunderstood as expressing whatever you feel in the moment. But unfiltered expression is not authenticity. It is impulsivity. Authenticity is alignment between values and behavior, not between emotion and behavior. If your values include respect, integrity, and responsibility, then reactions that violate those values are not authentic. They are unregulated. But when reaction becomes identity, this distinction disappears. People begin to justify behavior by appealing to being real. I'm just being honest. I'm not fake. This is how I feel. These statements protect reaction from examination. They also protect dysfunction. Emotional patterns often form early, in environments where they were adaptive. Anger may have created safety. Withdrawal may have prevented conflict. People-pleasing may have ensured belonging. Hypervigilance may have reduced uncertainty. These strategies worked once. That is why they stuck. But adaptation is context-dependent. A strategy that protected you in one environment may limit you in another. The problem is that the nervous system does not automatically update strategies. It repeats what worked before. And when those repetitions go unexamined, they solidify into identity. This is why people defend reactions that clearly harm them. Not because they enjoy the harm. Because abandoning the reaction feels like losing a part of themselves. There is fear beneath this resistance. If I'm not the angry one, who am I? If I'm not the anxious one, how do I stay safe? If I'm not the caretaker, will I still matter? Identity feels stabilizing. Even when it hurts. This is why change feels threatening. It is not just about behavior. It is about self-definition. And the nervous system treats threats to identity the same way it treats physical threats. With resistance. This resistance shows up as rationalization. I've always been like this. My family is like this. That's just my personality. These statements shut down curiosity. They turn patterns into facts. But personality is not destiny. Much of what people call personality is nervous system conditioning. Traits like short-tempered, reserved, overthinker, or conflict avoidant are often descriptions of emotional regulation styles, not immutable characteristics. When reaction becomes identity, people stop noticing the moments where the pattern does not appear. They ignore the evidence that they can act differently. Because that evidence contradicts the story. Identity is maintained by selective attention. You notice the reactions that confirm the identity. You overlook the responses that contradict it. This creates a self-reinforcing loop. The loop is strengthened by language. I am anxious becomes I'm an anxious person. I got angry becomes I have anger issues. The shift seems minor. It is not. It turns temporary states into permanent traits. And once a trait is assumed, effort drops. Why practice regulation if this is just who you are? Why expect different outcomes if the cause feels fixed? This is where resignation sets in. Not loud despair. Quiet limitation. People lower expectations of themselves. They stop aiming for steadiness, leadership, or depth. They settle for managing damage instead of changing patterns. This is one of the most tragic outcomes of unexamined reactivity. Not because people suffer, but because they accept suffering as inevitable. Breaking this cycle requires separating identity from behavior. You are not your reactions. You are the one experiencing them. This distinction must be felt, not just understood. It begins by noticing variability. Even the most reactive person is not reactive all the time. Even the most anxious person has moments of calm. Even the most avoidant person sometimes faces difficulty. These moments matter. They prove capacity. They show that behavior is state-dependent, not identity-dependent. When people say, I'm just like this, they are describing frequency, not impossibility. High frequency feels like permanence. But it is not. Behavior becomes identity only when it is repeated without interruption. Interruptions change the story. Each time you respond differently, even slightly, you introduce evidence against the identity. This evidence may feel uncomfortable at first. It challenges the familiar self-image. But discomfort here is growth. Letting go of an identity built around reaction can feel like loss. There is grief in realizing that what you believed was you was actually a pattern. There is vulnerability in admitting that change is possible because possibility brings responsibility. If you can change, then you can no longer hide behind "that's just who I am." This is where many people stop. They prefer certainty to responsibility, even if the certainty is limiting. But those who move forward experience something liberating. They realize they are not broken. They are trained. And training can be updated. This realization shifts the emotional tone from self-criticism to self-leadership. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" you ask, "What conditions produce this reaction?" Instead of blaming character, you examine triggers. Instead of defending identity, you build skill. Skill replaces shame. And skill grows with practice. As reactions loosen their grip, identity begins to change. Not because you force a new label, but because behavior shifts consistently. You start to see yourself differently. I handle things better now. I don't react the way I used to. I recover faster. These statements are not affirmations. They are observations. And identity follows observation. This is how real confidence forms. Not from declaring who you want to be, but from witnessing who you are becoming. When reaction no longer defines you, something else takes its place. Values. You begin to identify with how you choose, not how you feel. You become someone who pauses. Someone who responds. Someone who tolerates discomfort. Someone who stays present under pressure. These qualities are not inherited. They are practiced. And they feel far more solid than emotional labels ever did. Another important shift occurs when reaction loosens its hold on identity. You stop taking emotional states as self-evaluations. Feeling anxious no longer means you are weak. Feeling angry no longer means you are dangerous. Feeling overwhelmed no longer means you are incapable. Emotions become experiences, not verdicts. This reduces secondary suffering. Secondary suffering is the suffering caused by judging yourself for suffering. I shouldn't feel this way. What's wrong with me? These judgments intensify activation. They feed the reactive loop. When reaction is no longer identity, self-judgment loses fuel. You still feel emotion, but you don't add shame to it. This alone reduces intensity. Identity flexibility is one of the strongest predictors of resilience. People who see themselves as fixed struggle to adapt. People who see themselves as evolving adjust more easily. They experiment. They fail. They learn. They update. This is emotional adulthood. Not perfection. Adaptability. When reaction becomes identity, people defend patterns that hurt them. When identity becomes flexible, people outgrow patterns without drama. They simply stop repeating them. Not because they are forbidden, but because they are no longer necessary. This is the quietest form of transformation. No grand declarations. No reinvention. Just a steady reduction in reactivity and a steady increase in choice. In the next chapter, we will look at how emotional mastery develops in stages. Not as an all-or-nothing state, but as a progression. Understanding these stages helps you locate yourself honestly without judgment and see what the next step actually is. Because growth is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more deliberate. And that path has a structure. Most people think of emotional control as something you either have or you don't. You're calm, or you're not. You're disciplined, or you're reactive. You handle pressure well, or you fall apart. This belief is not only inaccurate, it's discouraging. Because emotional mastery is not a switch. It is a progression. And when people believe mastery is binary, they either judge themselves harshly for not having it, or they give up trying altogether. The truth is simpler and far more hopeful. Emotional mastery develops in levels. Each level builds on the previous one. Each level brings more choice, more stability, and more influence over your own behavior. And each level is accessible through practice, not personality. Understanding these levels matters, because growth becomes far easier when you know where you actually are. Not where you wish you were. Not where you pretend to be. Where you are. There is no shame in any level. Only information. The first level is unconscious reaction. At this level, emotion arises and behavior follows immediately. There is no pause. No awareness. No internal observation. The person is inside the emotion. Anger becomes shouting. Fear becomes avoidance. Frustration becomes blame. When asked later why they reacted the way they did, the answer is often, "I don't know," or "it just happened." This level is not stupidity or immaturity. It is untrained nervous system dominance. Most people spend much of their early life here, because no one teaches emotional regulation explicitly. Reactions are modeled, reinforced, and normalized. If you grew up around reactivity, you learned reactivity. At this level, emotional consequences feel external. People make me angry. This situation stressed me out. They triggered me. Responsibility is projected outward, not because of denial, but because internal awareness has not yet developed. The second level is conscious reaction. Here, awareness begins to emerge but after the fact. The person reacts emotionally, but later recognizes it. They replay the conversation. They notice regret. They think, "I shouldn't have said that," or "I could have handled that better." This level is painful. Because awareness has arrived, but control has not. The gap between intention and behavior becomes visible. People at this level often experience guilt and self-criticism. They know better but they don't yet do better. Many people get stuck here. They mistake awareness for mastery. They believe insight alone should change behavior. When it doesn't, frustration grows. But awareness is not useless. It is the foundation. The third level is conscious regulation. This is where real change begins. At this level, awareness arrives during the emotional experience, not after. The person notices activation while it is happening. They feel the tension. They recognize the urge. They realize, "I'm about to react." And in that moment, they pause. The pause may be brief. Sometimes only a second. But it exists. This pause is everything. It allows regulation. Breathing slows. Posture shifts. Language softens. The person may still feel strong emotion but they choose their behavior. They respond instead of react. This level requires effort. It feels unnatural at first. Because you are interrupting a deeply ingrained pattern. You are choosing restraint in moments when expression feels urgent. But with repetition, this level becomes more accessible. And something important happens. Confidence begins to grow. Not because emotions disappear, but because you prove to yourself that you can stay in control when they arise. The fourth level is embodied mastery. At this level, regulation becomes automatic. Not because you force it, but because the nervous system has learned safety. Emotional activation still occurs, but it rarely overwhelms. Recovery is fast. Triggers lose intensity. Pauses happen without effort. This is not emotional numbness. It is emotional efficiency. You feel what you need to feel and no more. This level is characterized by steadiness. Under pressure, you remain present. In conflict, you stay grounded. In uncertainty, you stay flexible. People often describe the state as calm, but calm is not the best word. The better word is available. You are available to think, listen, choose, and act deliberately. This level takes time. It is built through hundreds of small regulatory successes. Moments where you paused. Moments where you chose. Moments where you recovered without collapse. No single moment creates mastery. Accumulation does. The fifth level, the highest level, is emotional transformation. Here, emotions do more than get regulated. They get used. Energy that once fueled reactivity becomes fuel for action. Anger becomes clarity and boundary setting. Fear becomes preparation and focus. Frustration becomes persistence. Sadness becomes reflection and meaning. Emotion is no longer an obstacle. It is raw material. This level is not common. Not because it is unreachable, but because few people train long enough to reach it. Transformation requires familiarity with emotion. You cannot transform what you fear. You cannot use what you suppress. People who reach this level are deeply comfortable with their internal states. They do not rush to escape discomfort. They listen to it. They extract information. And then they act deliberately. It is important to understand that these levels are not linear in daily life. You do not graduate permanently from one to the next. Under stress, fatigue, hunger, or emotional load, people temporarily drop levels. This is normal. Mastery is not about never regressing. It is about recovering faster. A person at higher mastery levels still reacts sometimes. But the reaction is shorter. The damage is smaller. Repair happens quickly. This is why emotional mastery is best measured by recovery time, not perfection. How quickly do you notice? How quickly do you regulate? How quickly do you return to alignment? These questions matter more than whether you reacted at all. Another important truth is that different areas of life may be at different levels. You may be highly regulated at work and reactive at home. Calm in public and triggered in intimate relationships. This does not mean you are failing. It means mastery is context specific. And context can be trained. Calm in public and triggered in intimate relationships. This does not mean you are failing. It means mastery is context specific. And context can be trained. Understanding the levels allows you to set realistic expectations. You stop demanding mastery where you have not yet practiced. You stop shaming yourself for being human. And you start focusing on the next step, not the final destination. If you are at unconscious reaction, the next step is noticing. If you are at conscious reaction, the next step is pausing sooner. If you are at conscious regulation, the next step is consistency. If you are at embodied mastery, the next step is transformation. Growth is incremental. And incremental growth is sustainable. This framework also changes how you view others. You stop expecting regulated behavior from unregulated systems. You stop taking reactions personally. You respond with clarity instead of counter-reactivity. This does not mean tolerating mistreatment. It means choosing effective responses. When you know your level, and you recognize others' levels, emotional chaos decreases. You stop demanding what people cannot yet give. And you stop abandoning your standards to match their behavior. This is emotional leadership. Not control. Clarity. At every level, the practice is the same. Awareness. Regulation. Choice. What changes is how automatic these steps become. At first, they require conscious effort. Later, they occur naturally. Eventually, they become embodied. This is how skills work. You do not become fluent in a language by reading about it. You become fluent by using it. Emotional mastery is no different. You train it in moments. Small moments. Unremarkable moments. Moments where no one is watching. Those moments determine who you are under pressure. Because pressure reveals the level you practiced to. In the next chapter, we will move from understanding levels to learning how to interrupt emotional reactions in real time even when intensity is high. You will learn how to step out of autopilot and regain control in the moment, not later. Because insight without tools is frustration. And tools are what turn awareness into mastery. Awareness without action is frustration. Most people who begin to understand their emotional patterns reach a painful stage where they can see what's happening but still feel unable to stop it. They recognize the trigger. They feel the surge. They know they are about to react. And then they react anyway. This is not failure. It is the gap between insight and skill. Interrupting emotional patterns in real time is not about insight. It is about mechanics. It is about knowing exactly what to do in the seconds when the nervous system is activated and the old pattern is trying to take over. If you do not have a clear interruption strategy, autopilot will win. Not because you are weak. Because autopilot is fast. Interrupting the pattern means inserting a break into a sequence that has run uninterrupted for years. This break does not need to be dramatic. It needs to be reliable. The goal is not to stop emotion. The goal is to stop automatic behavior. Every emotional reaction follows the same basic sequence: trigger, activation, interpretation, urge, action. Most people try to intervene at the action stage. They tell themselves to calm down after they've already raised their voice. They try to explain themselves after they've already withdrawn. They apologize after damage has already been done. This is too late. Real interruption happens earlier. Ideally at the level of activation or interpretation. The earlier you intervene, the less force is required. The most effective interruption strategy has 4 components: stop, stabilize, observe, choose. These steps are simple by design. Simplicity matters under pressure. When the nervous system is activated, complexity disappears. You cannot remember elaborate techniques. You can execute only what has been practiced and reduced to essentials. The first step is stop. Stop does not mean suppress emotion. It means interrupt behavior. When you notice activation, you stop what you are doing. You pause speaking. You pause typing. You pause moving toward action. This may feel awkward. Silence often does. But silence is far less damaging than reactivity. Stopping creates a physical break in the pattern. It prevents the reaction from expressing itself while regulation catches up. This step alone prevents most damage. Many emotional mistakes are not irreversible, but they are unnecessary. Stopping buys time. Time allows regulation. The second step is stabilize. Stabilization is about the body, not the story. You do not argue with your thoughts at this stage. You do not try to make sense of the situation. You focus on physiology. Breathing is the most direct lever. Slow the breath, especially the exhale. A longer exhale signals safety to the nervous system. It tells the body that immediate action is not required. This does not eliminate emotion. It lowers intensity. Lowering intensity is enough. Even a small reduction restores access to choice. You may feel impatient during this step. That impatience is the urge to react. Let it exist. You are not trying to feel better. You are trying to feel regulated enough to choose. Stabilization can also involve posture. Unclench the jaw. Drop the shoulders. Relax the hands. These changes feed back into the nervous system. The body leads the mind. Once stabilization begins, the third step becomes possible: observe. Observation means noticing what is happening without judgment and without immediately believing the narrative. You observe the sensation. Tightness. Heat. Pressure. You observe the thoughts. They're disrespecting me. This is going to fail. I can't handle this. You observe the urge. To defend. To withdraw. To attack. Observation creates distance. Distance weakens compulsion. At this stage, you remind yourself of one critical truth: thoughts under activation are hypotheses, not facts. They may contain useful information. They may also be distorted. Your job is not to decide yet. Your job is to see clearly. This is where many people slip. They mistake observation for agreement. Observing a thought does not mean endorsing it. You can notice I feel disrespected without concluding they are disrespecting me. This distinction is subtle and powerful. The final step is choose. Choice is not about the perfect response. It is about the better response. Better than reaction. Better than autopilot. Better than immediate discharge. You ask yourself a simple question: what response aligns with my values and long-term goals? Not what feels good. Not what proves a point. What aligns? Alignment is the compass. Sometimes the aligned response is to speak calmly. Sometimes it is to set a boundary. Sometimes it is to ask a question. Sometimes it is to disengage temporarily. The point is not the specific action. The point is that the action is chosen, not compelled. This four-step interruption sequence must be practiced. Not once. Many times. At first, it will feel clumsy. You will forget steps. You will remember them too late. This is normal. Skill develops through repetition, not perfection. Each time you interrupt even partially, you weaken the old pattern. Each time you stop before acting, you reduce damage. Each time you stabilize, you train regulation. Each time you observe, you sharpen awareness. Each time you choose, you reinforce agency. This is how patterns are broken. Not through force. Through consistency. It is important to understand that interruption feels uncomfortable. The body wants completion. It wants release. Holding a pause feels like tension without resolution. This discomfort is the price of freedom. Most people avoid interruption because they mistake discomfort for danger. It is not. It is temporary. And it is survivable. In fact, staying with discomfort without reacting is one of the most powerful forms of nervous system training. It teaches the brain that emotion does not require immediate action. Over time, this lesson changes everything. The urge weakens. The intensity decreases. Recovery accelerates. Interrupting the pattern also requires managing expectations. You will not interrupt every reaction. Sometimes autopilot will still take over. When it does, the interruption can still happen afterward. You can pause mid-reaction. You can repair. You can reflect. Repair is part of mastery. Not because damage is acceptable, but because learning happens there. After a reaction, ask, where did I first feel activation? What thought did I believe? Where could I have interrupted sooner? These questions build skill. They turn mistakes into training data. Another important aspect of interruption is environment. Your environment either supports regulation or undermines it. Constant stimulation, poor sleep, unresolved stress, and lack of recovery lower your threshold. When thresholds are low, interruption is harder. This is not an excuse. It is a variable. Managing energy is part of emotional mastery. If you are exhausted, hungry, overstimulated, or overwhelmed, expect less from yourself. Plan accordingly. Delay difficult conversations. Create space. Protect recovery. This is not weakness. It is intelligence. Interrupting patterns also requires boundaries. If you repeatedly expose yourself to situations that overwhelm your capacity, interruption becomes unsustainable. Boundaries reduce unnecessary activation. They create conditions where regulation is possible. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about controlling exposure. Knowing when to step back is a form of mastery. Not all situations require engagement. Not all triggers require processing in the moment. Choosing when to engage is part of choice. Another challenge people face when interrupting patterns is fear of consequences. They worry that pausing will make them look weak. That silence will be interpreted as agreement. That restraint will be exploited. These fears are understandable. They are also largely unfounded. People who pause are often perceived as confident. People who regulate are often taken more seriously. And even when others misinterpret restraint, reacting impulsively rarely produces better outcomes. Interrupting the pattern does not mean being passive. It means being strategic. It means choosing timing, tone, and approach deliberately. Sometimes the most powerful response is delayed. Sometimes the most effective boundary is calm. Sometimes the strongest statement is silence. Interrupting the pattern also changes your relationship with time. You stop needing immediate resolution. You allow processes to unfold. You trust yourself to return to situations when regulated. This trust reduces urgency. Urgency fuels reactivity. Reducing urgency weakens autopilot. Over time, interruption becomes second nature. You stop thinking in steps. You simply pause. The body regulates. The mind widens. Choice appears. This is embodied skill. Not because you memorize techniques, but because you practice them enough that they became automatic. This is the paradox. You interrupt automatic behavior by building new automatic behavior. Regulation becomes the new default. Not through force. Through repetition. Interrupting emotional patterns is one of the most empowering skills you can develop. It gives you control where it matters most. Not control over circumstances. Control over response. And response determines trajectory. Small responses repeated daily shape relationships, careers, health, and self-respect. Mastery is built in moments no one sees. Moments where you pause instead of react. Moments where you breathe instead of escalate. Moments where you choose alignment over impulse. These moments accumulate. And one day, you realize something has changed. The triggers that once controlled you no longer do. Not because they disappeared, but because you learned how to interrupt the pattern. In the next chapter, we will move deeper into what supports this ability over time, how building a strong baseline through sleep, movement, and recovery makes emotional regulation far easier. Because mastery is not only about what you do in the moment. It is about how you live between moments. Most people try to regulate their emotions only when something goes wrong. They wait until they are overwhelmed. Until they are angry. Until they are anxious. Until they are already reacting. Then they reach for techniques. Breathing. Positive thinking. Self-talk. Sometimes these help. Often they don't. Not because the techniques are flawed, but because regulation is being attempted on an unstable foundation. Emotional mastery is not built only in moments of stress. It is built in the hours and days between them. This foundation is what we call the baseline. Your baseline is your nervous system's default state. It determines how easily you are triggered, how intensely you react, and how quickly you recover. A strong baseline makes regulation easier. A weak baseline makes even small stressors feel overwhelming. Most people underestimate how much their daily habits shape their emotional capacity. They think regulation is psychological. In reality, it is deeply physiological. The nervous system does not exist in isolation. It is influenced by sleep, nutrition, movement, stimulation, and recovery. Ignoring these factors while trying to master emotions is like trying to drive with an empty fuel tank. The first and most important component of the baseline is sleep. Sleep is not rest. Sleep is repair. During sleep, the brain processes emotional experiences, consolidates learning, and resets stress responses. Without adequate sleep, the amygdala becomes more reactive and the prefrontal cortex becomes less effective. This is not a theory. It is measurable. When sleep is compromised, emotional regulation deteriorates. People become more irritable, more impulsive, more anxious, and less resilient. Small frustrations feel intolerable. Perspective narrows. Recovery slows. No emotional technique can compensate for chronic sleep deprivation. This does not mean perfection is required. But consistency matters. Regular sleep schedules stabilize circadian rhythms, which stabilize hormone release, which stabilizes mood. If you want emotional mastery, protect your sleep. Not as a luxury. As infrastructure. The second component of the baseline is movement. The nervous system is designed to discharge stress through physical activity. Modern life often traps stress in the body. People sit for long hours, consume information continuously, and rarely move enough to release accumulated tension. This trapped activation lowers the threshold for emotional reactions. Movement clears it. Walking, lifting, stretching, running the form matters less than consistency. Movement signals safety. It tells the nervous system that energy can be expended and replenished. It reduces baseline arousal. This is why people often feel clearer and calmer after physical activity. They did not solve their problems. They regulated their state. Movement is one of the most underutilized emotional regulation tools. Not because people don't know it helps, but because they underestimate how much it helps. The third component of the baseline is nutrition. Blood sugar instability affects emotional stability. When energy drops, irritability rises. Decision-making weakens. Impulses strengthen. Many emotional reactions are intensified by physiological stress that has nothing to do with the situation at hand. Hunger, dehydration, and nutrient imbalance all lower emotional tolerance. This does not mean emotional mastery requires dietary perfection. It means awareness. Eating regularly. Hydrating. Not ignoring the body until it protests. The nervous system interprets physiological deprivation as threat. Threat increases reactivity. Supporting the body supports the mind. The fourth component is stimulation management. The modern world is saturated with input. Screens, notifications, news, social media, noise. The nervous system was not designed for constant stimulation. Continuous input prevents downregulation. It keeps the system slightly activated at all times. This creates chronic low-grade stress. When the baseline is already elevated, it takes very little to push it over the edge. People become emotionally reactive not because events are extreme but because there is no space for recovery. Managing stimulation means creating intentional quiet. Periods without input. Moments without screens. Time where the nervous system is allowed to settle. This is not boredom. It is regulation. Silence is not empty. It is restorative. The fifth component of the baseline is emotional processing. Unprocessed emotions accumulate. They do not disappear. They become background tension. When new stress arises, it stacks on top of old, unresolved stress. This is why reactions sometimes feel disproportionate. You are not reacting only to the present moment. You are reacting to everything that came before it. Processing does not mean rumination. It means allowing emotions to be felt and integrated without judgment. This can happen through journaling, conversation, therapy, reflection, or quiet awareness. Avoidance increases intensity. Acknowledgement reduces it. Emotions that are allowed to move do not get stuck. The baseline is also shaped by meaning. When people feel directionless, powerless, or disconnected from values, stress intensifies. Uncertainty without purpose feels threatening. Purpose organizes effort. It gives stress a container. People tolerate difficulty better when it serves something meaningful. This does not require grand missions. Clarity about values is enough. Knowing what matters helps the nervous system contextualize stress. Context reduces threat. Another often overlooked baseline factor is self-trust. When you trust your ability to handle difficulty, your nervous system stays calmer. When you doubt yourself, activation increases. Self-trust is built through experience. Every time you regulate instead of react, self-trust grows. Every time you recover from discomfort, confidence increases. This feeds back into the baseline. A nervous system that trusts itself does not overreact as easily. The baseline is cumulative. Small habits practiced daily shape it more than occasional interventions. You cannot outregulate a lifestyle that constantly destabilizes you. This is not about discipline. It is about alignment. If you want steadiness, your life must support steadiness. Building the baseline also requires honesty. You must notice what destabilizes you. Certain environments. Certain relationships. Certain routines. Ignoring these patterns keeps the baseline fragile. Adjusting them strengthens it. This may involve difficult choices. Reducing exposure. Setting boundaries. Changing routines. These changes are not avoidance. They are strategic. They create conditions where growth is possible. Many people resist baseline work because it feels indirect. They want immediate control. They want techniques. But techniques work best on stable systems. Baseline work is slower. And far more powerful. It shifts the entire operating range of the nervous system. When the baseline is strong, emotional spikes are smaller. Recovery is faster. Interrupting patterns becomes easier. Choice becomes more available. This is why some people seem naturally calm. Not because they suppress emotion, but because their baseline is regulated. They sleep. They move. They manage input. They recover. They live in alignment with their values. This steadiness is not accidental. It is built. Building the baseline also changes how you relate to setbacks. When you have a stable foundation, a bad day does not become a bad week. A reaction does not become a spiral. You return to center more quickly. This reduces fear of emotion. Fear of emotion is one of the biggest drivers of reactivity. When people fear being overwhelmed, they react faster to avoid it. When they trust recovery, urgency decreases. This trust comes from a strong baseline. Baseline work is not glamorous. It does not feel like breakthrough. It feels like maintenance. But maintenance prevents breakdown. And over time, it produces a quiet strength. A sense of capacity. A feeling that you can handle what comes. This feeling is the ground of emotional mastery. Without it, techniques feel forced. With it, regulation feels natural. In the next chapter, we will explore how negative emotions can be used rather than fought, how anger, fear, and frustration contain energy and information that can be directed instead of discharged. Because mastery is not only about calming down. It is about using what you feel intelligently. Most people relate to negative emotions as problems to eliminate. Anger is something to suppress. Fear is something to overcome. Anxiety is something to get rid of. Frustration is something to avoid. This mindset creates an internal war. You feel something arise and immediately judge it as bad. You try to push it away, distract yourself, or override it with logic or positivity. Sometimes this works temporarily. Often it doesn't. Because emotions are not just feelings. They are energy. And energy does not disappear when ignored. It gets redirected often into reactivity, exhaustion, or self-criticism. Emotional mastery does not come from eliminating negative emotions. It comes from learning how to use them. Every emotion carries information and momentum. When that momentum is unregulated, it turns into reaction. When it is regulated, it becomes fuel. This is the difference between emotional discharge and emotional direction. Anger, for example, is not inherently destructive. Anger is an energizing emotion. It mobilizes the body. It sharpens focus. It prepares you to confront something that feels wrong, unfair, or threatening. The problem is not anger. The problem is indirect anger. Indirect anger explodes or implodes. It lashes out, or it turns inward. Directed anger sets boundaries. It clarifies standards. It fuels decisive action. When regulated, anger becomes assertiveness. Not aggression. Assertiveness. Fear works the same way. Fear is not weakness. Fear is a signal of uncertainty and risk. It heightens awareness. It encourages caution. It prepares the system to gather information and plan. When fear is unregulated, it becomes avoidance, procrastination, paralysis, catastrophizing. When fear is regulated, it becomes preparation. It sharpens strategy. It motivates learning. It encourages redundancy and foresight. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to act while fear is present and regulated. Frustration is another misunderstood emotion. Frustration arises when effort meets resistance. It signals that something is not working. Unregulated frustration leads to quitting or lashing out. Regulated frustration fuels persistence and innovation. It motivates adjustment. It encourages problem solving. Many breakthroughs are powered by frustration that did not get discharged prematurely. Even sadness has energy. Sadness slows the system. It encourages reflection. It draws attention inward. When unregulated, sadness becomes rumination or despair. When regulated, it becomes integration. It helps you process loss, recalibrate priorities, and deepen meaning. The issue is not the emotion. It is what you do with it. Using emotional energy begins with allowing emotion without judgment. Judgment blocks information. When you label an emotion as bad or unacceptable, you stop listening. Instead of asking, "What is this emotion trying to tell me?" you ask, "How do I make it stop?" Stopping emotion is rarely productive. Listening is. Listening does not mean obeying. It means extracting signal before choosing action. The first step in using emotional energy is containment. Containment means holding the emotion without discharging it impulsively. You allow the sensation to exist. You regulate intensity. You prevent it from hijacking behavior. Containment is not suppression. Suppression pushes emotion down. Containment holds it steady. Think of it as keeping pressure in a container rather than letting it explode. This pressure is energy. Energy can be directed. The second step is interpretation. What is this emotion pointing to? Anger often points to a boundary violation or unmet expectation. Fear often points to uncertainty or lack of preparation. Frustration often points to a mismatch between strategy and reality. Sadness often points to loss or the need for integration. These are not absolute truths. They are hypotheses. But they are useful starting points. Instead of reacting, you investigate. What value feels threatened? What outcome matters here? What adjustment is required? This inquiry transforms emotion from enemy to ally. The third step is direction. Once you understand the signal, you decide where to channel the energy. Anger can be directed into a clear conversation. Fear can be directed into planning and skill building. Frustration can be directed into experimentation. Sadness can be directed into reflection and meaning making. Direction requires delay. You rarely direct emotion well in the moment it peaks. You contain first. You direct later. This delay is not avoidance. It is precision. People who master emotional energy often appear calm, but they are not passive. They feel deeply. They simply do not waste energy on reaction. They invest it. Using emotional energy also requires tolerating intensity. Strong emotions come with physical sensations. Heat, tightness, pressure. Many people react not because of the situation but because they want to escape sensation. They confuse discomfort with danger. Learning to stay with sensation without reacting is a critical skill. It allows energy to accumulate long enough to be useful. This is why practices that build distress tolerance, such as breath control, physical training, or mindful exposure, increase emotional mastery. They teach the nervous system that intensity can be survived. Once intensity is survivable, urgency decreases. Once urgency decreases, choice increases. Another important principle is timing. Emotion has a lifespan. If you act too early, you discharge energy without direction. If you wait too long, energy dissipates or turns inward. Using emotional energy requires sensing when you are regulated enough to act but still energized enough to care. This timing improves with practice. People often ask, how do I know when I'm ready to act? The answer is simple. When you can think clearly and still feel the emotion. If the emotion has completely vanished, you may lack momentum. If the emotion is overwhelming, you lack clarity. The sweet spot is regulated intensity. This is where effective action lies. Using emotional energy also means letting go of moralizing emotions. Emotions are not good or bad. They are functional. Moralizing emotion creates secondary reactions. You feel angry then ashamed for being angry. You feel afraid then weak for feeling afraid. This layering increases intensity and confusion. Dropping moral judgment simplifies experience. You feel what you feel. You regulate. You choose. That's it. This simplicity is powerful. Another trap is venting. Venting feels like release. Sometimes it helps. Often it reinforces reactivity. When you vent without regulation or direction, you rehearse the emotional pattern. You strengthen the association between emotion and discharge. Using emotional energy is different. It requires restraint. It requires intention. It often requires solitude or structured reflection rather than immediate expression. Expression is not always the best use of energy. Action is. This does not mean suppressing communication. It means choosing the right form and timing. A regulated conversation is far more effective than an emotional outburst. The same is true internally. Clear internal dialogue beats emotional flooding. Using emotional energy also changes motivation. Many people rely on pressure, fear, or self-criticism to motivate themselves. These methods work at a cost. They create chronic stress and eventual burnout. When you learn to direct emotion rather than fight it, motivation becomes cleaner. Anger becomes resolve. Fear becomes diligence. Frustration becomes persistence. You stop wasting energy fighting yourself. This frees enormous capacity. People often report feeling lighter not because emotions disappeared, but because internal conflict reduced. When emotion and intention align, effort decreases. Life feels less like resistance and more like engagement. Using emotional energy also deepens meaning. Emotions signal what matters. If something triggers strong emotion, it matters to you. Ignoring that signal leads to disconnection. Listening to it leads to alignment. This does not mean indulging every feeling. It means respecting the information it carries. Over time, you begin to trust your emotional system. Not as a dictator. As an advisor. This trust reduces fear of emotion. When you no longer fear emotion, you stop reacting to it. And when you stop reacting, you can use it. This is the paradox. The emotions you fear most often contain the most energy. When integrated, they become sources of strength. This integration takes time. It requires patience. It requires repeated containment and direction. But the payoff is profound. You stop feeling at war with yourself. You start feeling unified. Emotion, thought, and action work together. This is not emotional control. It is emotional intelligence in action. In the next chapter, we will explore how emotional mastery naturally produces confidence, not the loud, performative kind, but quiet confidence rooted in self-trust and consistency. Because confidence is not something you convince yourself to feel. It is something that emerges when you know you can handle what you feel. Most people think confidence is something you project. A tone of voice. A posture. A way of speaking. They believe confidence is about appearing certain, decisive, and unshaken. This kind of confidence exists. But it is fragile. It depends on control of circumstances and approval from others. Quiet confidence is different. Quiet confidence is not about how you appear. It is about how you relate to yourself under pressure. It grows from one place only: trust in your ability to handle your internal experience. When you know you can tolerate discomfort, regulate emotion, and choose your response, you stop needing to prove anything. You don't need to dominate conversations. You don't need to rush decisions. You don't need to defend your ego. You move with steadiness. That steadiness is felt by others. Confidence is often mistaken for certainty. In reality, the most confident people are comfortable with uncertainty. They do not need guarantees before acting. They do not panic when outcomes are unclear. They trust their capacity to adapt. This trust does not come from optimism. It comes from evidence. Evidence gathered through repeated experiences of emotional regulation. Each time you face discomfort without collapsing or reacting impulsively, you build self-trust. Each time you recover from a mistake without self-destruction, self-trust deepens. Each time you pause instead of react, confidence accumulates quietly. Quiet confidence is built invisibly. No one sees the internal moments where it forms. They only see the result. Calm under pressure. Clear communication. Measured responses. People often ask confident individuals for advice, assuming they know more. Often, they don't. They simply regulate better. This regulation creates mental space. Mental space allows thinking. Thinking produces better decisions. Better decisions reinforce confidence. The cycle feeds itself. Another misconception about confidence is that it eliminates fear. It does not. Confident people feel fear. They feel doubt. They feel uncertainty. The difference is that these emotions do not dictate their behavior. They act with fear present. This is important. If you wait to feel confident before acting, you will wait indefinitely. Confidence follows action. Specifically, it follows regulated action. Acting impulsively does not build confidence. It often erodes it. You may feel temporary relief or bravado, but afterward, self-trust decreases. Regulated action builds confidence because it aligns behavior with values. You know you acted deliberately. You know you chose. This knowledge matters. Quiet confidence also changes how you handle mistakes. Mistakes no longer threaten identity. They become feedback. Confident people do not catastrophize errors. They analyze them. They ask, "What can I learn?" instead of "What does this say about me?" This orientation reduces defensiveness. Defensiveness is the enemy of growth. When you are not defending your identity, you can improve rapidly. This is why emotionally regulated people often progress faster. They waste less energy protecting ego. Quiet confidence also affects communication. You listen more. Not because you lack opinions, but because you are not afraid of disagreement. You don't interrupt to assert dominance. You don't rush to be understood. You trust that you can clarify when needed. This patience makes others feel heard. Ironically, it increases influence. People trust those who are not scrambling for control. Confidence also affects boundaries. Unconfident people struggle with boundaries because they fear rejection. They over-explain. They apologize excessively. They compromise prematurely. Quietly confident people set boundaries calmly. They do not justify excessively. They do not escalate. They state needs clearly and accept the outcome. This does not mean they always get what they want. It means they respect themselves regardless of outcome. That respect is the core of confidence. Another feature of quiet confidence is emotional consistency. Not emotional flatness consistency. People know what to expect from you. Not because you are predictable in opinion but because you are predictable in regulation. You do not swing wildly. You do not explode or disappear. This reliability creates trust. Trust amplifies confidence. People relax around those who are emotionally consistent. They feel safe. Safety invites openness. This dynamic deepens relationships. Quiet confidence also reduces comparison. When you trust yourself, you stop measuring yourself constantly against others. You may still notice differences, but they do not define your worth. Comparison loses emotional charge. This frees attention. You focus on your own trajectory instead of competing narratives. This does not mean ambition disappears. It becomes cleaner. You pursue growth because it matters, not because you are trying to prove something. This shift reduces burnout. Proving is exhausting. Purpose is sustainable. Confidence rooted in regulation also changes how you experience success. Success no longer inflates ego excessively. You enjoy it without clinging. You do not fear losing it as intensely. This prevents over-identification with outcomes. Over-identification makes people fragile. Quiet confidence keeps you grounded. The same applies to failure. Failure hurts, but it does not define you. You recover. You adjust. You continue. This resilience is visible. People often describe confident individuals as grounded. Groundedness is emotional regulation expressed externally. Another important aspect of quiet confidence is humility. This may seem counterintuitive, but humility and confidence often coexist. When you are secure, you do not need to pretend you know everything. You can say, "I don't know." You can ask questions. You can change your mind. These behaviors require confidence. Insecure people cling to certainty. Confident people tolerate not knowing. This openness accelerates learning. Quiet confidence also reduces the need for external validation. Praise is appreciated but not required. Criticism is considered but not devastating. Feedback becomes data, not judgment. This makes confident people easier to work with. They do not personalize everything. They do not overreact. They respond thoughtfully. Over time, this reputation compounds. Opportunities follow reliability. Leadership emerges naturally. Not because you demand authority but because people trust your steadiness. Quiet confidence is especially powerful in conflict. In heated situations, emotional intensity rises. Most people match intensity. Confident individuals do not. They lower it. They slow down. They speak clearly. They do not escalate. This often de-escalates others. Not always, but often enough to matter. And even when others remain reactive, confident individuals maintain self-respect. They do not sacrifice alignment to win arguments. They prioritize long-term integrity over short-term victory. This earns respect, sometimes silently. It is important to understand that quiet confidence is not passivity. Confident people can be firm. They can say no. They can confront issues directly. The difference is tone. There is no emotional charge behind the firmness. No need to dominate. No need to prove strength. Strength is assumed. This assumption is felt. Quiet confidence is also cumulative. It grows with age but not automatically. It grows with experience processed well. People who repeat the same emotional patterns for decades do not become confident. They become rigid. Confidence grows from learning. Learning requires reflection. Reflection requires regulation. This is why emotional mastery precedes confidence. You cannot bypass regulation and arrive at confidence. Any confidence built without regulation is brittle. It collapses under stress. Quiet confidence endures. One of the clearest signs of quiet confidence is comfort with silence. Silence no longer feels like a threat. You do not rush to fill it. You allow space. Space allows clarity. Clarity improves outcomes. This comfort changes conversations. Others speak more. Truth surfaces. Decisions improve. Quiet confidence also changes your relationship with time. You are less rushed. You do not force outcomes prematurely. You trust process. This patience often produces better results. Rushed decisions are often fear-driven. Patient decisions are often strategic. This does not mean hesitation. It means timing. Quiet confidence knows when to act and when to wait. Another important aspect is self-compassion. Confident people are not harsh with themselves. They hold themselves accountable but not with cruelty. Cruelty undermines trust. Self-trust cannot grow in a hostile internal environment. Firmness with kindness creates stability. This internal tone matters. You cannot speak harshly to yourself and expect confidence to grow. Confidence grows in safety. Safety allows exploration. Exploration leads to competence. Competence reinforces confidence. This loop is natural. Finally, quiet confidence changes how life feels. There is less inner noise. Less urgency. Less fear of emotion. You still experience stress. You still face difficulty. But you no longer feel at the mercy of your internal states. This freedom is subtle. It does not announce itself. But it changes everything. You walk differently. You speak differently. You decide differently. People notice. They may not know why they trust you. They just do. In the next chapter, we will explore how emotional mastery is tested most intensely in relationships where old patterns are triggered, stakes are high, and regulation matters most. Because mastery in isolation is incomplete. It must hold under pressure, especially with the people who matter most. Emotional mastery is easiest when the stakes are low. When you're alone. When nothing important is on the line. When you feel rested, respected, and in control. But life rarely tests you there. It tests you in relationships. With partners, family, friends, colleagues, the people whose opinions matter, whose behavior affects you, and whose presence activates old patterns. This is where emotional mastery is either real or theoretical. Pressure reveals training. In relationships, pressure comes from attachment. When you care, your nervous system is more reactive. Loss feels threatening. Rejection feels dangerous. Misunderstanding feels urgent. This is not weakness. It is biology. Attachment activates the same neural systems as physical safety. That is why relational conflict feels intense. And why emotional mastery matters most here. In relationships, reactions are rarely about the surface issue. They are about meaning. A tone is interpreted as disrespect. Silence is interpreted as abandonment. Criticism is interpreted as rejection. The reactive brain fills gaps quickly. And once meaning is assigned, emotion follows. Under pressure, people default to their earliest strategies. They fight, flee, freeze, or appease. They argue to regain control. They withdraw to protect themselves. They shut down to avoid overwhelm. They over-accommodate to prevent conflict. These patterns are amplified in close relationships because the nervous system feels exposed. This is why people who are calm in public can be reactive at home. It is not hypocrisy. It is vulnerability. Mastery under pressure begins with recognizing this dynamic. You are not failing because relationships trigger you. Relationships are designed to. They expose unhealed patterns. They reveal regulation limits. They show where growth is needed. This is not a flaw. It is information. The first requirement of mastery under pressure is slowing down. Speed escalates conflict. Tone sharpens. Words harden. Once escalation begins, both nervous systems amplify each other. Slowing down breaks this loop. Slowing down does not mean disengaging permanently. It means reducing pace. Pausing before responding. Lowering volume. Speaking fewer words. These changes signal safety. They give both nervous systems a chance to regulate. In moments of relational tension, silence is often more effective than explanation. Explanations under activation sound like defense. Defense escalates conflict. Silence, when calm, creates space. Space allows regulation. Regulation allows understanding. Another key aspect of mastery under pressure is separating impact from intent. Under stress, people assume intent. They're trying to hurt me. They don't care. They're being selfish. These assumptions fuel emotion. Often, intent is unclear. Impact may be real. But assuming intent escalates conflict unnecessarily. Mastery involves acknowledging impact without assigning motive prematurely. I felt dismissed. That landed as criticism. These statements describe experience without accusation. They invite dialogue. Accusations invite defense. This distinction matters. Another principle is owning your internal state. Instead of saying, "You made me angry," you say, "I'm feeling angry." This may seem semantic. It is not. Ownership reduces blame. Blame escalates. Ownership invites responsibility. Responsibility restores agency. This does not mean absolving others of accountability. It means handling your side first. You regulate before you negotiate. This order is critical. Many conflicts fail because people try to solve relational problems while dysregulated. This is like trying to repair something while shaking. Regulate first. Then address the issue. Another challenge in relationships is the urge to be understood immediately. When activated, people push for validation. They want the other person to acknowledge their perspective now. This urgency often backfires. The other person, already activated, feels pressured. Pressure triggers defense. Defense blocks understanding. Mastery under pressure means tolerating delayed understanding. You trust that clarity can come later. You do not force it. This patience feels uncomfortable, but it preserves the relationship. Mastery also requires distinguishing between boundaries and control. Under stress, people attempt to control others to reduce discomfort. They demand change. They issue ultimatums. They escalate. Control may produce short-term compliance. It damages long-term trust. Boundaries are different. Boundaries define your behavior, not theirs. I won't continue this conversation if voices are raised. I need space right now. Boundaries are calm. They are not punishments. They protect regulation. Mastery under pressure also involves recognizing when repair is needed. Even regulated people make mistakes. They react. They say things poorly. What matters is repair. Repair restores trust. It signals accountability. A genuine repair includes acknowledgement, responsibility, and adjustment. Not justification. Not deflection. Repair requires humility. Humility requires confidence. Insecure people avoid repair because it feels like weakness. Confident people repair because they value alignment. Another important element is not keeping score. Under pressure, people accumulate grievances. They bring past conflicts into present ones. This overwhelms the system. It turns a single issue into an indictment. Mastery involves addressing issues as they arise, not storing them. This requires courage. It also requires regular communication. Small conversations prevent large explosions. Mastery under pressure also means knowing when to disengage. Not every moment is appropriate for resolution. If emotions are too high, disengagement is responsible. I'm too activated to continue this productively. This is not avoidance. It is regulation. Returning later is key. Disengagement without return becomes withdrawal. Withdrawal erodes trust. Mastery involves closing loops, returning when regulated. Following through. Relationships also test mastery through repetition. The same issues arise again and again. This can be discouraging. People think, we've talked about this already. But repetition is how nervous systems learn. Each repetition is an opportunity to respond slightly differently. Progress is measured in reduced intensity, shorter duration, and quicker repair. Not elimination. Another pressure point is expectations. Unspoken expectations create resentment. Mastery involves articulating expectations clearly and checking whether they are realistic. Many conflicts are not about wrongdoing. They are about mismatched expectations. Clarity reduces emotional load. Mastery also requires empathy. Empathy does not mean agreement. It means understanding the other person's internal experience. Empathy lowers defensiveness. It creates safety. Safety allows change. This applies even in disagreement. You make sense, even if I see it differently. This sentence can de-escalate many conflicts. Another test of mastery is vulnerability. Expressing needs feels risky. People fear rejection. They mask needs with criticism. Criticism triggers defense. Mastery involves stating needs directly. I need reassurance. I need clarity. I need time. Needs expressed calmly invite connection. Needs disguised as attack invite distance. Relationships also test mastery through power dynamics. Workplace hierarchies. Family roles. Cultural expectations. Power imbalances intensify reactivity. Mastery involves awareness of these dynamics. It involves choosing responses that protect dignity yours and others. Another challenge is emotional contagion. One person's reactivity triggers the others. Mastery involves breaking this chain. You do not have to match intensity. You can remain regulated. This is difficult. It requires practice. But it changes dynamics. One regulated nervous system can stabilize a relationship. Not always immediately, but over time. Mastery under pressure also includes knowing when a relationship is not safe or healthy. Regulation does not mean tolerating harm. If a relationship consistently undermines your well-being, mastery may involve distance. Choosing yourself is not failure. It is self-respect. This distinction matters. Mastery is not endurance. It is discernment. When emotional mastery is applied consistently in relationships, something shifts. Conflict becomes information instead of threat. Disagreement becomes manageable. Connection deepens. Trust grows. Not because conflict disappears, but because it is handled skillfully. Mastery under pressure transforms relationships. Not into perfection, into resilience. In the next chapter, we will explore how the brain changes through practice, how emotional mastery literally rewires neural pathways over time. Because understanding change intellectually is helpful, but understanding that change is biological makes it sustainable. Change feels difficult because people think it should happen faster than biology allows. They understand an idea and expect behavior to follow. When it doesn't, they conclude something is wrong with them. Nothing is wrong. The nervous system simply changes at its own pace. Emotional mastery is not a mindset shift. It is a physiological retraining process. Every emotional reaction you have is supported by neural pathways that have been reinforced through repetition. These pathways are efficient. They fire quickly. They conserve energy. The brain prefers efficiency over accuracy. This is why old patterns persist even after insight. The good news is that the same mechanism that created these patterns can change them. The brain is plastic. Plasticity means the brain reorganizes itself based on use. Neurons that fire together wire together. Neurons that stop firing together weaken their connections. This is not metaphor. It is biology. Every time you react emotionally, you strengthen the pathway that produced that reaction. Every time you regulate and choose differently, you weaken that pathway and strengthen a new one. This process is gradual. And it is reliable. Understanding this removes impatience. You stop demanding instant transformation. You start focusing on repetition. Rewiring the system does not require dramatic breakthroughs. It requires small, consistent deviations from autopilot. Each deviation matters. Each pause. Each breath. Each moment of restraint. Each repair. The brain does not distinguish between big and small moments. It tracks frequency. If a regulated response occurs often enough, it becomes the default. This is why people who practice consistently feel different months later. Not because they forced change. Because their nervous system updated. One of the most important principles of rewiring is specificity. The brain changes in response to specific actions in specific contexts. General intention is not enough. You do not rewire anger by deciding to be calmer. You rewire anger by practicing regulation when anger arises. You do not rewire avoidance by wanting confidence. You rewire avoidance by staying present in moments you usually escape. The brain learns from experience, not intention. This is why emotional mastery must be practiced in real situations. Visualization helps. Reflection helps. But action teaches. Another principle is timing. The most powerful rewiring happens during or immediately after activation. When emotion is present and you respond differently, the brain registers prediction error. It expected reaction. It got regulation. Prediction error drives learning. This is why pausing under pressure is so effective. It surprises the system. Surprise creates change. Rewiring also depends on emotional intensity. Low-intensity moments are useful for practice. High-intensity moments create stronger learning signals. This does not mean seeking overwhelm. It means using naturally occurring challenges as training opportunities. When you regulate during intense emotion, the brain takes note. It updates threat assessments. It learns safety. This is how triggers lose power. Not by avoidance. By regulated exposure. Avoidance prevents rewiring. It tells the brain the situation is dangerous. Regulation teaches the opposite. This is why people who avoid conflict remain reactive. And people who face it skillfully become calmer. Another critical factor is recovery. Rewiring does not happen only during effort. It consolidates during rest. Sleep, quiet reflection, and downtime allow the brain to integrate new patterns. This is why chronic stress slows change. The brain needs safety to reorganize. This makes baseline work essential. You cannot rewire efficiently in constant survival mode. Another overlooked aspect is self-talk. The tone you use internally affects plasticity. Harsh self-criticism increases threat. Threat narrows learning. Supportive, accurate self-talk maintains safety. This does not mean positive affirmations. It means factual encouragement. This is hard, and I'm practicing. I paused longer than last time. I'm learning to do this differently. These statements reinforce effort. They keep the nervous system engaged without overwhelm. Rewiring also requires repetition without obsession. Tracking progress obsessively increases pressure. Pressure increases threat. Threat impairs learning. Instead, focus on showing up. Practice without constantly evaluating. Let change emerge. Many people sabotage rewiring by demanding proof too early. They look for permanent calm. They test themselves. They push. This creates strain. Strain slows integration. Trust the process. Consistency beats intensity. Another key principle is identity lag. Behavior changes before identity updates. You may act differently long before you feel like a different person. This mismatch can be unsettling. You may think, this doesn't feel like me. That feeling is normal. Identity takes longer to shift than behavior. If you stop because it feels unfamiliar, rewiring halts. Continue anyway. Familiarity will follow. Rewiring also involves unlearning. As new pathways strengthen, old ones weaken. This can feel like loss. Old reactions may still appear under stress. This does not mean failure. It means the old pathways still exist. They are simply used less. Under extreme conditions, the brain may revert temporarily. Recovery speed matters more than recurrence. The system is updating, not deleting. Another important factor is contextual reinforcement. Your environment can either support or undermine rewiring. If you surround yourself with constant reactivity, learning is harder. If you normalize regulation, learning accelerates. This is why relationships matter. Regulated environments create regulated people. This is also why changing your own behavior can shift group dynamics. You become a new signal in the system. The brain also responds to meaning. When regulation is connected to values, motivation increases. If emotional mastery serves something important, integrity, leadership, peace, practice becomes easier. Meaning reduces friction. Friction slows change. Another underestimated aspect of rewiring is patience with setbacks. Setbacks are part of learning. Each time you react and then repair, you still reinforce regulation. Repair teaches accountability. It models recovery. The brain learns not only from perfect execution but from correction. Correction is data. This perspective reduces discouragement. Discouragement often causes people to quit just before change consolidates. Rewiring also benefits from somatic awareness. The brain and body learn together. Noticing physical cues of activation allows earlier intervention. Earlier intervention creates easier regulation. This feedback loop accelerates learning. Over time, the body signals earlier. You notice tension sooner. You breathe sooner. This shifts the entire curve of response. Another element is time under regulation. Holding a regulated state while emotion is present teaches endurance. It shows the nervous system that safety can coexist with intensity. This is a powerful lesson. The longer you stay regulated, the stronger the learning. Even seconds matter. This is why micropauses are effective. You do not need long meditations. You need repeated brief regulation. Finally, rewiring requires trust. Trust in biology. Trust in process. Trust that repetition works even when progress is invisible. Most neural change happens beneath awareness. You feel different suddenly, but the change was gradual. People often say, something just clicked. It didn't. It accumulated. One day, the new pathway became dominant. This is how mastery feels. Not dramatic. Stable. Reliable. You respond differently without effort. Not because you think harder. Because your nervous system learned. Rewiring the system is the deepest level of emotional mastery. It makes regulation sustainable. It makes choice automatic. It reduces reliance on willpower. This is not self-control. It is self-alignment. In the final chapter, we will bring everything together: agency, freedom, and what it means to live without being controlled by emotion while still fully alive. Because mastery is not about becoming less human. It is about becoming more deliberate. At the deepest level, emotional mastery is not about control. It is about freedom. Not freedom from feeling, but freedom from being driven by feeling. Most people live closer to reaction than they realize. They believe they are choosing, but they are often responding automatically to internal states they do not fully understand. Emotion pulls the strings. Thought justifies afterward. This is not a personal failure. It is the default human condition. Agency begins the moment you realize this. Agency is the capacity to choose your response even when your internal state is strong. Freedom is what that capacity produces. Freedom does not mean comfort. It means authorship. You become the author of your behavior rather than the character being pushed by the plot. This distinction is subtle and life-changing. When people lack agency, they experience life as something that happens to them. People provoke them. Situations overwhelm them. Circumstances dictate their mood. They may appear functional, but internally they feel reactive and constrained. Agency changes this orientation. Life still happens. But you are no longer trapped inside it. You participate deliberately. Agency does not remove difficulty. It changes your relationship to it. You stop asking, "How do I make this feeling stop?" and start asking, "How do I want to respond to this situation?" This shift is quiet, but it restores dignity. Freedom grows as your nervous system learns a critical truth: you can feel intensely and still choose wisely. This truth must be experienced, not believed. Each time you tolerate discomfort without reacting, you reinforce it. Each time you act in alignment while feeling emotion, you strengthen it. Eventually, the body trusts this capacity. And when the body trusts it, urgency fades. Freedom is not emotional numbness. It is emotional mobility. You can move through states without getting stuck. Anger rises and passes. Fear appears and informs. Sadness arrives and integrates. Nothing needs to be exiled. Nothing needs to dominate. This fluidity is what people often mistake for detachment. It is not detachment. It is integration. Emotion and choice coexist. This is what psychological adulthood looks like. Another dimension of freedom is responsibility. This word is often misunderstood. Responsibility is not blame. It is ownership. When you have agency, you own your responses. Not because others are irrelevant, but because your behavior is yours. This ownership is empowering. When you stop outsourcing your internal state, you reclaim power. "You made me feel this way" becomes "I'm noticing this reaction." That shift alone changes everything. You are no longer waiting for others to change so you can be okay. You are okay because you can choose. This does not mean tolerating harm. Agency includes leaving, setting boundaries, and saying no. Freedom includes discernment. You are not obligated to stay in situations that erode your well-being. Agency is knowing the difference between discomfort that builds you and discomfort that damages you, and choosing accordingly. Freedom also changes how you relate to control. When people lack internal regulation, they seek external control. They try to manage people, outcomes, and environments to avoid discomfort. This creates rigidity. Rigidity increases stress. Stress increases reactivity. It becomes a loop. Agency breaks this loop. When you trust your ability to regulate, you no longer need to control everything. You can allow uncertainty. You can tolerate ambiguity. You can adapt. Adaptability is a core expression of freedom. Rigid systems break. Flexible systems endure. Emotionally free people are flexible. They bend without losing integrity. They respond without collapsing. They adjust without abandoning themselves. Freedom also changes ambition. Without agency, ambition is driven by fear. Fear of inadequacy. Fear of falling behind. Fear of being exposed. This kind of ambition is exhausting. With agency, ambition becomes values-driven. You pursue growth because it matters, not because you are trying to outrun discomfort. This shift reduces burnout. Effort becomes cleaner. Motivation becomes sustainable. You stop using emotion as a whip. You start using it as fuel. Freedom also transforms rest. People without agency struggle to rest. They feel guilty. They feel restless. They feel unproductive. Their nervous system does not know how to settle. People with agency can rest fully. They allow recovery without self-judgment. They understand that restoration supports capacity. This relationship with rest deepens resilience. Freedom also affects identity. You no longer define yourself by emotional patterns. You define yourself by values and actions. I'm someone who chooses thoughtfully. I'm someone who regulates before responding. I'm someone who repairs when I misstep. These identities are flexible. They evolve. They support growth. They are not threatened by emotion. This identity shift reduces shame. Shame thrives when identity is fused with reaction. When behavior is seen as temporary and correctable, shame loses power. You still hold yourself accountable, but without self-attack. This internal climate matters. People cannot grow in environments of internal hostility. Freedom requires internal safety. Agency creates it. Another profound effect of agency is peace with imperfection. You accept that you will still react sometimes. You accept that mastery is not perfection. You measure progress by recovery, alignment, and learning, not by the absence of emotion. This acceptance reduces fear of failure. Fear of failure causes many people to avoid growth. Agency makes failure survivable. Survivable failure encourages experimentation. Experimentation accelerates development. Freedom also changes leadership. Whether or not you hold a formal leadership role, emotional agency makes you influential. People feel regulated around you. They trust your responses. They follow your steadiness. This influence is not loud. It does not announce itself. But it is powerful. Emotionally free people often become anchors in chaotic systems. Not because they control others, but because they regulate themselves. This regulation ripples outward. Agency also deepens intimacy. When you are not afraid of your own emotions, you can be present with others. You listen without defensiveness. You respond without urgency. You allow space without withdrawal. This presence creates safety. Safety allows connection. Connection deepens meaning. Freedom is relational as much as it is internal. Another dimension of freedom is time. Without agency, people feel rushed internally. Even when nothing urgent is happening, their nervous system is always slightly ahead, anticipating threat. Agency brings you back into the present. You are here. You respond to what is real, not what is imagined. This presence reduces anxiety. Anxiety lives in imagined futures. Agency lives in current choice. Freedom is also ethical. When you choose your responses, you align behavior with values. You act with integrity. even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Integrity builds self-respect. Self-respect stabilizes identity. This stability is deeply calming. You no longer have to rationalize your behavior to yourself. You know why you acted. You chose. That clarity is freedom. Perhaps the most important outcome of agency is trust. Not just self-trust. Trust in life. When you know you can handle internal difficulty, the world feels less threatening. Challenges feel manageable. Uncertainty feels tolerable. You stop bracing constantly. You start engaging. This engagement makes life richer. Not easier, richer. Emotionally free people feel deeply. They care deeply. They are affected. But they are not ruled. They experience the full range of human emotion without being enslaved by it. This is not detachment from life. It is participation with choice. Agency is not something you achieve once. It is something you practice continuously. Every pause reinforces it. Every repair strengthens it. Every aligned response renews it. Freedom is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of choice. And choice, practiced consistently, becomes character. This is what emotional mastery ultimately gives you. Not dominance. Not control. Not superiority. Freedom. The freedom to respond instead of react. The freedom to feel without